Hi, I'm very pleased to be speaking today with Rob Blair, who's an assistant professor of political science at Brown University. My name is Gardner Campbell. I've been working with Open Learning 17 and Open Learning 18, and I've also had my interests in the area of network learning for many, many years. So I was very excited to read about Rob Blair's networked course on democracy erosion. It's the democratic-erosion.com domain. I have lots of questions. I'm eager to get to them. But first of all, thank you very much, Rob, for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I read about your course in the newspaper. I believe it was the Times.
The Washington Post.
Yep. It was the Washington Post. Okay. And as I read about it, of course, I was fascinated by the topic and also quite fascinated by the design of the course itself in terms of the network. So let me just start off by saying, for folks who don't know about the course, if you could give a description of the course for us, and also tell us something about why you chose this networked collaborative approach to bringing in partner schools.
Sure. So the basic idea of the course is it's a course on why democracies fall apart. And we approach that question really from an empirical perspective. So what do we know from theory, from history, from social science about the causes and the consequences of democratic erosion? And we use the term erosion very consciously because that's typically the way that democracies fall apart today. They don't typically fall apart in coups or in other sorts of large-scale, sudden events of collapse. They tend to decay quite a bit more slowly. So basically, that's the sort of broad theme of the course, and we've structured it so that it's a multi-university collaboration. So we have, I believe it's 20 universities now participating, 19 in the U.S., one, the University of the Philippines, participating as well. We share a syllabus, so basically a group of us got together over the summer before the 2018-19 academic year and put together a syllabus that we would share across all versions of the course. And we have various aspects of the course that are collaborative among the universities. So for example, rather than writing conventional papers, students write for a blog, which is shared across all the universities. Basically, they take some recent or current event in the news in the US or elsewhere, and then they use the readings from the course as a lens through which to understand that event. And then they're required to comment on one another's posts, and oftentimes posts are actually explicitly responses to previous posts. So for example, at Brown, we had a couple of students who debated whether the fake news mantra is a threat to democracy in the US. And one of them argued essentially that it's not, and the other one responded that yes, indeed it is. So that's one component of the collaboration. Another is, in lieu of a final paper, all of the undergraduates write country case studies. So they basically take a case that has a country that has experienced some democratic erosion over the past 6 or 7 years. And they write a case study, and the format of the case study is standardized. And the reason we do that is because master's students at Texas A&M are then taking all of those case studies and turning them into a meta-analysis on the causes and symptoms of democratic erosion that will be presented to USAID's Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance section in May. So they're actually just getting to work on the meta-analysis right now. So at Texas A&M, it's being taught at the master's level in the Bush School of Public Policy. For them, their final projects always involve some external client where they produce some policy-relevant deliverable. It just so happened that their client this year was USAID, so this really fit nicely with the theme of the course. And then finally, in most versions of the course, students are required to attend some political event in the area around their university, and then they write a blog post reflecting on that event. So it could be a rally in favor of immigration rights, right, like the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, or it could be a pro-Trump rally or an anti-Trump rally or a town hall meeting or any number of different events. So that's basically the structure of the course. And to answer the actual question you asked me, the reason we decided to do it this way, it was for a number of reasons. So there were sort of logistical reasons where I knew I wanted to teach this course, and as I started talking about it to other faculty, there was a lot of interest from them as well. And so it became clear that, well, if we're all interested in doing this, why don't we join forces, exploit some economies of scale so that we can share the lesson planning, share the syllabus design, and other sorts of things that otherwise each of us would be doing totally on our own. There was a more, sort of deeper reason for doing it, which was that I at least certainly felt very surprised and confused by the result of the 2016 election in the US. A lot of the other faculty felt that way as well. And really, just as from an empirical perspective, it wasn't what we expected. And I think we also felt that the tone of the campaign had really created a lot of alienation among not just us, but among our students as well. And that's across the political spectrum. I mean, that was sort of a recurring theme of the election, was the alienation that people felt. And so we really wanted our students to feel that they were part of a conversation that was bigger than just a standalone seminar or a standalone lecture. So to connect them with students at other universities around the country. And our goal really was to get some intellectual diversity into this conversation as well. So Brown is a very left-leaning university. I'm sure that won't surprise anybody to hear. A number of our other participating universities are very left-leaning as well. But we also have some in more right-leaning states, Texas A&M being one example. Georgia State is participating. Ohio State, these are places that you don't typically think of as sort of bastions of liberalism. So the hope was we could have not just diversity of students across the country, but actually diversity of perspectives as well. And I think really in that respect, the course has been a great success. I think students really do feel that they're doing something more than just sitting in a classroom the way that they always do, that they're contributing to a broader conversation, not just putting their writing up there on the blog for anybody to read, but also communicating their ideas directly to a policymaker, to USAID, and having this networked conversation across all of these different campuses.
So you've got various ways in which the network assembles itself. You've got various ways in which the network's output, if we call it that, feeds into different kinds of opportunities. There's some marvelous recursion going on. It's a really interesting and thoughtful design that also seems to me to have taken advantage of some serendipity. Is that fair?
Definitely.
So let me ask you a little more about the way the network has operated. And as I say, part of this reflects my own fascination with opportunities for network learning that I think are largely untapped in higher education, but are implicit in some of the structures, at least to now, that we still have available to us across the internet or on the web. I mean, the very fact that there is a website, democratic-erosion.com, reflects a number of barriers that could be there but are not in terms of identifying a locus for this kind of study. So let's start back at the beginning. You mentioned conversations with fellow faculty at other schools. How did those conversations take place? Were they primarily face-to-face at a conference? Were they mediated primarily by email? How did that happen, and how did you get that network of conversations activated and focused enough to be able to come together?
So it actually started with a lunch with a couple of my colleagues here at Brown, where this was shortly after the election, and there has been a lot of rhetoric out there about how U.S. democracy is under threat, how Donald Trump in particular poses a threat, and I think we felt just very ill-equipped to really understand whether that was true, and if it is true, what we should be doing about it, and if it's not true, why we're also worried that it is true. And so really we were just talking over lunch about, what could we do from our position as academics to try to shed some light on that, not just for ourselves, but for our students as well. And the idea of the course arose over the course of that lunch. And then we basically, my colleague Jeff Colgan here at Brown, the two of us just started putting out some feelers, just emailing some friends to see if this was of any interest to them. It really was sort of a snowballing process where, so I study, democratic erosion is not my wheelhouse typically. That's not what I study. I study international intervention and the rule of law in Africa. And so I reached out to other Africanists, people who study intervention, because they're just the people in my network, to see if they were interested in this. And as we started to get more people, it started to seem like, actually there's quite a lot of interest in this. So we ended up writing a blog post for the Duck of Minerva, which is an international relations blog that a lot of folks in political science and IR read. And from that, we got some additional takers. I ended up basically just circulating a sort of forum email to a bunch of different networks that I'm connected with in political science, and got some more folks interested that way. And then a lot of it turned out to be word of mouth. So I ended up getting emails from people who just heard about the course from in one way or another, and were interested in signing on. And then, of course, with the so the Washington Post wrote this really nice piece about the course a couple of weeks ago, and I've gotten a bunch more emails now from universities that want to participate next year. So it's sort of a combination of face-to-face mechanisms and networks, our immediate networks, and then also just these broader networks that we reached out to.
So it's interesting that the word immediate in this case means two things. At least I hear two things. One of them is proximity in terms of expertise or groups that were already there, but also immediate in the sense that I can't imagine forming and actualizing this kind of conversation or the course that resulted via snail mail. I mean, it's striking to me to, having lived through a lot of this transformation myself, to hear that, well, email, of course, email, but that's a global light-speed telecommunications network that, like the web, riding on the internet as it does, permits certain kinds of very rapid affinity group formation, which you were able to capitalize on. And then this blog, I know the Owl of Minerva flies at midnight. Is that a play? The Duck?
I should know what Duck of Minerva actually refers to. I don't know. It's just it's one of those blogs that we're all kind of keyed into. Anybody who studies IR in any way kind of knows about it and checks in with it every now and then.
So who sponsors that blog? Do you know anything about where it comes from? Is it just one of the things like it's like air now? It's just there, or?
For us, it's like air. For people in IR, so it's run by a group of editors, and they have some folks who post really regularly, and then they have invited contributions, or people basically submit contributions for them to publish as well. So it's a combination of those things. And we have a number of these venues in political science at this point.
So with those models out there in front of you, were you informed by that? Did you have that in your head when you decided? And when did you decide to purchase the domain democratic-erosion.com? How did you decide that this course would have a domain?
Well, I think that really became clear once we realized that it was going to be more than just a small handful of universities doing this. At first, it seemed like maybe it'll just be 2 or 3 of us. We'll try this as a dry run, and then if others are interested in joining later, we'll expand. But pretty quickly, the number got up to 10, 11, 12, and we got to over a dozen. It was clear we need some mechanism to coordinate our activities and to allow students to really engage with one another virtually. And so the website was an obvious way to do that. It was also a way to project this out to the public. So we wanted this to be something of a public good. So the syllabus is up there. You can get it. There's links to all the papers. Some of them, unfortunately, are paywalled, but many of them are not. And they're books you can buy. There are articles you can read on the web. So we wanted to really invite people to come in and experience this as an outward-looking project as well. So the website has existed for quite a while, and we've had great tech assistance here at Brown to keep the thing up and running. I'm not a tech guy myself, so it's been very helpful having folks who really know what they're doing with this.
So people at Brown did help you with website design. Did they buy the domain? Does that belong to you? How do those little pieces work? These are very logistical questions, but part of my agenda here, I guess, is that if somebody wanted to do this about, I don't know, anything,
Right.
like what were the steps, the little pieces that you had to pull together to be able to do that?
So basically, we ended up getting some financial support from the Swear Center here at Brown, which is it's a center that tries to merge scholarship with public engagement and civic action. And so I basically pitched this to them, explained to them kind of, hey, here's what we're trying to do. They have some grants, some small grants that they offer faculty to develop courses that have this sort of engaged component to them. So I met with them and we started talking about the course. And I got a grant from them that I used to hire a research assistant and a teaching assistant who helped me get this thing off the ground, and then also to buy the domain, to get a tech RA, a tech research assistant who basically helps us, who's still on our payroll and just makes sure the everything's up and running and nothing is crashing on us. So that was, that financial support was very important. I should say, it's not terribly expensive to set up a website like this. It's a WordPress website. We did buy the domain, but we didn't break the bank. We didn't break the bank doing it. Really, I used most of that grant to hire research assistants here at Brown who could help us read some of the vast literature that's out there and kind of figure out what's going to go on the syllabus, what's not, and then to help with some of the coordination across universities.
Do you have a background as a blogger yourself? Have you done much outward-facing work in your history?
No, a lot of my work has been in West Africa, especially in Liberia. And when I first started working there, I wrote some pieces for the Huffington Post. This was back in 2009 probably, and then hadn't really done much after that. Wrote something for another of our political science blogs. This would have been maybe a year and a half ago, but hadn't really done a whole lot of outwardly facing writing. But it was always something I was interested in. I knew that I not becoming a public intellectual necessarily, although that certainly is appealing as well, but just wanting to get ideas out there beyond the rather narrow community that I occupy. So it was on my radar, even though it wasn't something that I was doing very often.
So that leads me to another thing I'm very curious about, which is, of course, the cross-university student blogging. I myself have used student blogging for many, many years and have always found it to be extraordinarily helpful, though there are always objections, not so much from the students, but from people who I think, understandably, are concerned with issues of privacy. Maybe the word or the acronym FERPA has been tossed around a little bit in your presence. These are kind of typical responses. I find the student blogs and the way you've set it up just, extraordinarily refreshing and wonderful. We're following along not just with resources provided by experts, but we're also following along with fellow learners, and we're all part of that group in one way or another. So could you talk a little bit about how you decided for the students, first of all, to be networking their learning via blogs, and second, for those blogs to be out in the open and visible, and how you framed that as an activity for the students as well?
Yeah, so this actually was a bit delicate because we wanted the students to have a platform where they could put their ideas out there, but we didn't want to subject them to any abuse. So you'll notice if you go on the website that only students can comment on one another's posts. We don't allow the public to comment. And that was basically because we thought, we've read, internet comment boards before. We know how sour these can turn. And we just thought, these are our students. These are undergraduates. We're not trying to be overprotective, but at the same time, we don't want to subject them to sniping from some anonymous commenter that happens to read one of their posts and objects to something in it. So we tried to walk that thin line. We have had students who are concerned about privacy. And so we have a couple of students who've posted anonymously or under pseudonyms. We've allowed that. We don't encourage it. We like this to be something where students really feel this is an argument that I am comfortable enough making that I'm going to put my name behind it. And in general, these are not tendentious pieces for the most part. It's the students really trying to understand what's going on in the world through the readings that we assign them in class. But it was definitely, we had a lot of discussion about whether this was an appropriate mechanism, how we could make sure that the students would feel comfortable posting. And it's, it's been sort of a mixed bag. I think in some respects, so I've used Twitter and other platforms to sort of blast out posts as they arise. At this point, the posts are so many that I don't do that anymore. It was really when we were just getting started, but now we have hundreds of students writing for us. So there's just a lot of content up there, too much for me to keep up with. Although that's something we're thinking of other ways to deal with that in the future. We wanted this to feel, we wanted the students to feel like their ideas really were getting projected out there. But we did want to put in some safeguards. So I think the best way to have the students feel like their work is being engaged with is to allow comments. Let anybody come on the blog and comment, and then the students can see, this is the number of people that actually commented on my post. And that's a real good immediate metric of how much attention the piece is getting. And we just thought the trade-off, on balance, it just made sense not to allow that. But in general, I think the students have actually found it to be a useful exercise. And we're thinking now of ways that we can actually spread their ideas even more widely. So, for example, a number of posts from the fall 2017 semester have been assigned as required readings for the spring 2018 students. So we create some continuity that way. So our students from the fall, they know, now my ideas are required reading for students at, over a dozen universities across the country. And students that are taking the class this semester, they get a chance to read models of really, especially good and especially topical blog posts that they can then use as inspiration for their own work. We've now teamed up, we just finalized this week. The Social Science Research Council has a great project called Anxieties of Democracy. And part of that project is a Democracy Papers series where they invite some pretty big name political scientists and other social scientists to write on some topic related to democracy for their, it's more than a blog really, it's essays, but big names, including names that we read actually in the course. And so SSRC agreed to have a contest where our students, they will publish probably 2 to 4 of the best posts from our students from all the universities that are participating so far. So we'll basically, each of the faculty will nominate 1 or 2 posts that were especially good. And then we'll send that long list to SSRC. They will decide who the winners are, and then they'll work with the winners to expand and polish the pieces and put them up. And those pieces will be published alongside some of the top thinkers in the field. So that's another way we're trying to get students' work out there. We also had a contest where we teamed up with Bright Line Watch, which is a group that is running a survey of experts and the public, basically gauging perceptions of U.S. democracy over time. So we had and their data is all publicly available. So we had some tutorials where we had their in-house data scientists speak to some of our students about how to play with the data, how to make sense of it. And then our students have been using the data to actually write blog posts. And our hope is that eventually we'll set up a contest with Brightline Watch as well, where the best post that uses Brightline Watch data will then be showcased on their website too. One of the
interesting parts about the student blogging, as I can see it happening, is that they're blogging, but posting their bloggings to the democraticerosion.com site.
Right.
Did you give any thought to having the students post within their own blog sites with a domain of their own, or with some blogging platform, let's say a WordPress friendly or WordPress blogging platform on their own, and feeding that into the site via RSS? What was your thinking as you thought about those two things? Just the reason I asked for a couple of reasons, but one is, if they're blogging on their own, they can, of course, moderate their own comments in ways they choose, which is, if you're going to be out in public on a blog site, it's probably a useful skill. But I'm just curious about the way you thought about that as you put the design of the course together.
Yeah, so to be totally honest with you, I hadn't even thought about that as an option. But now that you mentioned, I think it's potentially a good idea. We were really just trying to set it up in a way that would be as simple as possible for the immediate purpose of getting this thing up and running. So this is the first year of the collaboration. We really didn't know how this was going to go. And so I had used WordPress before. My research and teaching assistant had used WordPress before and had some experience with it. And so we just decided, the easiest way to do this is to set up one of these sites, and then have the students basically, each of them gets their own username. They can sign up, so they post themselves. They can, see what's happening with their post. They can go back and edit if they want. We hadn't considered giving each student their own domain. I think my worry, if we did that, would be that that would just open up a lot of potential technical problems. So every student would have to figure out how to do that. And in some cases, UCLA, for example, they incorporated parts of our syllabus into an introductory lecture class on comparative politics, where they have 125 students. So having 125 students setting up their own domains, probably more than a few of them would end up with some technical difficulties along the way. So that would be my hesitation. But I think it's potentially a good model.
Well, it does add a layer of complexity. There's no doubt of that. One way around it is to have a WordPress multi-site installation, where essentially what you use is one central domain in which everyone has their own subdomain, and essentially setting up their own blog instance, but not an instance of WordPress itself.
I see.
And then they get the opportunity to choose themes, come up with their own headers, essentially personalize the site so that it's reflective of who they are as learners. But yeah, it's another layer of complexity. And another reason I ask this is that it is fairly unusual in my experience to see a site devoted to a course in this way that also seems pretty savvy about things like WordPress and RSS feeds. There's even a way to get an RSS feed of the posts. And
right.
One of the things that has kind of been in the air since Google Reader died is that people don't even know what RSS is anymore. And if my students are any example, they're also forgetting what a URL is. And so there's a way in which the very affordance of the web that could empower more distributed and kind of democratically interesting conversations seems to be eroding as well. So your course is contributing to the conservation of the web in some ways that are interesting to me. Do you talk about that at all? Do you talk about the web and the internet? There you are in the medium that also the Russians hack into and has brought us all the dismay of social media. Does that topic of the web itself ever come up?
I don't know if the topic of the web per se. Certainly the topic of infiltration of the web and what's going on now with Russian interference and fake news and these other themes. That certainly arises all the time, or at least certainly in my class. We talked about that quite a bit. The RSS piece, that was really, I continue to use an RSS reader. And so I just thought, well, I want to be able to follow the blog. So let's make sure I'm able to do that. I don't know how many other people subscribe to it, but we could probably find that out. I hope it's, I hope it's more than a few. I do think this certainly has sparked conversations with individual students about issues like internet privacy, issues like some of these are students who are graduating and want to go get jobs, and what happens if they post something controversial? Do they want to then do they want to take that down after they finish the course? What do they want to do with that? It's not quite the conversation I think you were referring to, but it's certainly thinking about the role that the web plays in their lives now as part of the course, and then also moving forward, how that there will still be a footprint of the work that they did in the course when they move forward, and that's quite different from a usual course where you write your final paper, you submit it to the professor gives you a grade, and that's it. And so this is a different exercise in that way.
David Wiley has a phrase for the kinds of assignments that students do just to get them over with and really have no life, except perhaps at the bottom of a bird cage or mulching after the course is over. He calls them disposable assignments. And in some respects, what's happening here is the very opposite of that, to the point that people do have to start thinking about their digital footprint. And yet, it's also the case that what's being put out here, at least from what I can see, are ideas formed in the process of learning. So they're not as if this is the position I take for the ages and must be evaluated in that sense.
No.
They really are an account of the way people's minds are engaged with questions over time in a way that's not like an op-ed or not like a position paper that you have to defend when you run for municipal, sheriff or whatever. How do you describe that interesting permanence and provisionality, the way in which when you talk to the students, this does go out there, it can get quoted, it may get quoted, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, but it's also an account of you as a learner, and that too is a valuable part of the public discourse. How do you articulate that for the students?
Yeah, well, I mean, so in terms of the way I articulate that for the students, really we just tell them from the outset, you should think of these as living documents. It's not like a final paper in that you submit it to me and that's the end. It still lives there, and you can go back and revise. If you change your mind about one of the ideas that you published, you can go back and revise, or you can write another post responding to your own post. And so, think of this as an opportunity for you to go through this sort of iterative process of understanding a complex topic and knowing that you're not putting out the final word. I don't know how many students have taken the opportunity to go back and revise their post. I know a handful have. It probably doesn't happen all that often. They've got a lot of things to do, a lot of other work to get done. But I think they appreciate that aspect of it. Certainly, I think there are some posts. So some of the students write about topics where I think they have a pretty strong position, and probably a pretty uncontroversial position. If they write about what's happening right now in Poland, for example, there are very clear signs of democratic erosion in Poland. I don't think anybody would really argue that there aren't. And so some of those posts, I think, it's just a chance for them to sort of verbalize what they've been learning. Some of them are quite a bit more complicated. We've had interesting posts about cases like Japan or Germany, places where it's not so obvious what's going on, and there I think the students really are using this as a venue to just air some ideas, right? To kind of put them out there and see how other students respond to them, and then hopefully continue revisiting them as the semester goes along. My hope is that because these stay out there, they're still out there on the web, that even if students aren't going back and actively revising their posts, they're keeping them in the back of their mind in a way that they might not if it were a paper that they just submitted for a seminar. So, my hope is the student who wrote about, the rise of far-right parties in Germany, my hope is he's still thinking about that now. He's still reading about what's going on in the news. The student who wrote about the lack of populist parties in Japan, my hope is that he's still, following what's going on there and has his earlier argument in the back of his mind. Even if he doesn't go back and actually revise it, he's still revising it in his head. And that's exactly the sort of iterative process that we want to encourage.
So you have that most laudable of pedagogical ambitions. You'd like the learning to become part of the fabric of their ongoing intellectual life.
It's a lofty goal. Well, I don't know how often it is realized, but
it's certainly, the odds improve if this public venue that is linkable, searchable, out there in this global lightspeed telecommunications network is the platform, than if it's on nice 20-pound printer paper, 12.1-inch margins, which then, it's as J.C.R. Licklider once said, a piece of paper is a great display technology, but that doesn't make it a great information technology. It's because you can't get at it. It's right there.
Right.
So, speaking of that, another question about the way the web itself is an implicit agent or actor in this course. Do you talk to students about hyperlinking? Do you encourage them to link out to things or to link to each other? To what extent is that something that you talk about in the course?
Yeah, so we very explicitly encourage them to hyperlink. And part of that is citing. So if these were standard papers, we would have them, there would be a list of references at the end of the paper. And these aren't standard papers, but we do want them to be doing research. We want them to be able to defend the claims that they're making. And hyperlinking is sort of a shorthand sort of referencing. It's an alternative to a list of references at the end of a standard academic paper. So all of them, not all posts have hyperlinks, but the vast majority of them do, and we do actively encourage that. We explicitly encourage them to write posts in response to one another, and obviously when they do that, to hyperlink. We thought about actually requiring that they write at least one of their posts in response to another student. We didn't end up including that requirement this semester, but it's something that I think we'll revisit after this semester's over. All of us will get back together and we'll think about sort of what went well, what we could improve, and that's one thing that we've already flagged as a possibility for the future, to just the students right now, to the extent that they're engaging with one another, some of that engagement is voluntary. If you want to write a post in response to somebody else's, you may, but you don't have to. You do have to comment. That much is a requirement. But in the future, we might add a little bit more prodding to ensure that there's even more communication across universities.
Prodding, scaffolding, encouragement, it's all part of that.
Exactly.
It's that developmental ethos that encourages people to have a broader view of what they might want, which is mighty meta. But it brings me to the final question I have for you. It's the final question for this particular conversation. I have about 50 other questions. But, so what is the future for this course? What are the things that have surprised you? What are the things that have most pleased you? Or maybe you think, gee, that could certainly be built out.
Yeah.
Is this something that you plan to continue? Because, of course, as Neil Young observed, rust never sleeps, and democracy itself is extraordinarily prone to erosion because of its own lofty ambitions. So what's the future look like for democraticerosion.com?
So we are going to certainly continue the collaboration next year. And I suspect most of the universities that are teaching it this year will teach it again. And we've already got a handful of additional universities, probably 6 or 7, maybe more, that are lined up to join the collaboration. And hopefully more will do that, including some more universities outside the US. So we've got Ben Gurion University in Israel is looking to join. Sciences Po in Paris is looking to join. We've been in conversation with some folks in Germany, some folks in London, seeing if we can get more transatlantic collaborators. So we're hoping to make this really more of a global course as much as we can. So that's one aspect of it that we're gonna expand. We are going to have a conference in late August, where we're going to invite a group of probably around 30 students to come to Brown, along with a bunch of the participating faculty. So they'll get to actually see each other face to face. This has been a purely digital form of communication and collaboration so far, and we want to add some flesh and bones to that as well. So they'll basically come to Brown for a day. We've raised a bunch of money to host the conference, and we'll pay their way, we'll pay their lodging. There'll be a series of lectures and small group projects and some breakout sessions, and hopefully a keynote and some meals that we'll all share together. So that'll be a nice way to just get them to get to really interact with one another face to face. Two aspects of the course that I was maybe disappointed is too strong, but things that I think we could improve. So one is, I think there are more opportunities to create digital sort of digital ways for these students to communicate beyond just the blog. So University of Memphis taught the course in the fall when I was teaching it, and we had a joint virtual session where we used Zoom to have our students communicate with one another around the posts that they wrote about the political events. So we really, Memphis is obviously a very different setting than Providence, Rhode Island. And we were just interested in having the students talk to one another about their quite disparate experiences attending some of these political events. And it was very promising. We had some technical difficulties that hopefully we can overcome in the future. And I'd like to see that. I'd like to see a lot more of that. I'd like to see students interacting not just on the blog, but actually face-to-face, even via the internet, but still face-to-face. Or maybe having discussion boards that are more informal than the blog, but where maybe they're specific to particular readings, where we post some questions and we ask the students to jot down, 4 or 5 sentences in response to those questions, and then they can interact with one another. We would love to create a purely online version of the course. So right now, you can go to the syllabus and you can download the readings and you can follow along. We will eventually post lectures and discussion questions for each week of the syllabus as well. But what we'd really like to do is create a version where no matter where you are, no matter who you are, you can log on and you can hear the lectures being delivered by the actual faculty. You can participate in discussions with other people who are logged on with you, maybe a Coursera version of the course or an edX version of the course. We thought about that a little bit for this year, but even just keeping the wheels on this thing was complicated enough without adding that additional layer of complexity. But that's certainly something we're looking at, if not for next year, then certainly moving forward. And the other thing is, even though we have a fair amount of intellectual diversity among the students, ultimately, universities tend to be more left-leaning than their respective states tend to be, and students who enroll in this class, they tend to enroll because they think maybe something's amiss with American democracy, or the democracy in whatever their home country happens to be. So we'd like to more actively encourage students to take positions that might not be their own personal views, but to get outside of their comfort zone a little bit, their political, partisan comfort zone. On the syllabus, we try to have competing perspectives on any particular issue. So if we're going to have a post, assign them to read something that's very critical of the Trump administration, for example, we'll have them read something else that praises the administration for similar reasons. And I'd like the students to engage with that a little bit more, to try to get outside that sort of standard political bubble that a lot of them occupy. And I don't know exactly how we'll do that, but it's something we're going to be thinking about moving forward.
Well, one of the things that drew me to the course you're teaching and made me say, I've got to get in touch with this person and do an interview, was actually a learner testimonial that was quoted in the Washington Post article about the benefits of communal learning and being able to see the various perspectives in various locations. And that's great. But the greater part, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that I could go and read that student's work.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily be able to do that in a Coursera course or an edX course, certainly not in a Blackboard course or in a typical learning management system. Right. And while there was and always will be a kind of vulnerability in being able to be quoted in that way, it also means that if people can see you and they're people who are well-meaning, and certainly I hope to believe that I act in good faith, you can make this kind of contact. And not to get mawkish about it, but that was a moment of hope for me that morning as I read that story. Hope for the web, hope for higher education, and the kind of hope you always get when students go, whoa, this is really working for me. And this is not a conclusion, it's the experience of learning with others. So is that something that you've noted as well? And is it something that your colleagues have talked about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is a major part of the appeal of the course for the students, is knowing they're going to be networked in this way. They're not just communicating with an audience of 1 or an audience of 12 or however many people are sitting around the table. They're really communicating much more broadly than that. I'm really excited to teach the course again, because when I taught it, there were just 3 universities teaching the full syllabus, and there were a few more that were teaching, 4 or 5 weeks from the syllabus. So it was sort of the first. My students were really guinea pigs for this project. This semester, there are 17 universities that are participating. So it's just exploded in a big way, and it'll continue to do that. So I think that the more networked the students feel, I think it really does. It's an intangible benefit of the course, but probably the most powerful one, that they really feel like they are part of a conversation that's happening outside of the walls of their classroom. They really are communicating with people all across the country and all across the world, and that I think is a major draw. And we're gonna do whatever we can to continue building on that. I think that's really the heart of the course is encouraging that sort of networked communication.
Well, this stuff doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen easily. It doesn't happen without good leadership. So if I can salute you and your colleagues for the work you're doing, which is bold work. It's often difficult work. It's not always recognized by the home institution, but it sounds like you've got some support for that. And it's also the kind of work that you don't know what will happen until you're in the midst of it. So in that sense, it's kind of doubly bold, and will never be less than bold as long as you're committed to a public layer of this. But as I say, it was a moment of hope, and it's been a real honor and a privilege to be in conversation with you about this grand and ongoing experiment. Long may you run, and thank you and all your colleagues for the work you're doing.
Well, likewise, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. It's been a great project so far, and I love knowing that it's generating interest. That's really terrific for me as well. So thank you very much for the invitation.